It is in trouble, and I think the people that live up there realize that.
The rampaging hordes whose noise and garbage and ignorance take a toll on the mountain are not only an irritation, they represent a much greater threat: fire. Each year, the Spring Mountain forests are a tinderbox just waiting to go up.
This thing goes up, there is no mountain.
An official with the U.S. Forest Service once described Mount Charleston as the ghetto of the National Forest System. And in a sense, that might be right. Like some urban slums, the Spring Mountain Range hasn't exactly been a high priority when it comes to government programs and protection efforts. It's tough to point fingers at any one agency because there are 13 different public entities that have a piece of the mountain, and they're often not on the same page. Add to that the conflicting interests of private landowners and toss in a few million visitors each year, and it becomes abundantly clear why there is trouble on the mountain. Over the next hour, we'll look at the many challenges facing Mount Charleston, at the toll that's been taken on this special place, and at a few ideas that might help to preserve the area for future generations. Cool, green Mount Charleston has always been a place of refuge for desert-weary Las Vegans. Even before there was a Las Vegas, native POUCE escaped the heat of the valley by walking and camping under the trees of this unique alpine environment. Now, some 80 years after the first roads into the mountains allowed access by automobiles, Mount Charleston and its surrounding wilderness are in trouble. Overtaxed and overstressed by too many people, too many cars, and not enough attention from the government agencies that are charged with preserving this irreplaceable treasure. Is it Mount Charleston or a stadium tailgate party? On busy weekends, dueling boom boxes pierce the solitude of this national forest. Every sliver of dirt on both sides of the road is jammed with parked cars. People picnic in their vehicles. Partiers slam beers and suck down cigarettes. Gang graffiti mars road signs and buildings. Anything that isn't nailed down, or anything that is broken off and pilfered for use as makeshift toboggans. And when the hordes depart, that's when the real ugliness emerges. Endless piles of trash, old inner tubes, cardboard sleds, fast food wrappers, and everywhere the refuse from what looks like a frat party. Often the trash is dumped just a few feet from garbage cans. Longtime residents can't understand how someone could appreciate the mountain enough to come up for a visit, but not enough to keep it clean.
Trash is just overwhelming. Nobody picks it up. They don't see any place to put it, so they just leave it. That's unreal that you just leave everything there. And the people that hike in the area say that the place is littered with diapers, baby diapers. They said it's terrible.
Garbage is a serious problem. The worst part of this is in the winter when the snow play hits and people are out there and they break their little toys that they've bought to slide and do these kinds of things. Well, the snow melts in spring. And below it, you have about 5 months worth of trash, plastics, and so on.
My pet peeve is baby diapers. That's the worst. I'll find probably a dozen of those a day that are just wrapped up, thrown in the bushes. I don't know why people don't have any sense in that. It's their baby, not mine.
No one here knows the trash problem on the mountain better than Brian Cicotti. He not only lives up here year-round, but for the past 4.5 years has made trash pickup his own personal project. Disgusted by the garbage he sees on the side of the road every day, Cicotti launched his one-man cleanup campaign back in 1999. His territory covers close to 60 miles of roadway.
As a rule, I can do about 1.5 miles a day, but like I'll venture off up into the woods. I'll find a trail of trash and it'll take me another half hour up that way. So there's no time limit on it. It's when it happens, when it gets done. I can tell what kind of people come up to what kind of trash that they're leaving me.
After seeing firsthand what people toss out, almost nothing would surprise him.
Clothing, there's a lot of clothing. What I think people do is when they get wet, they play in the snow, they take their clothes off and they leave them. And I find jackets, pants, shirts, you name it.
Yeah, look at this. Wonderful.
Broken bottles, love them. Tear right through my bags most of the time.
Litterers are often beer drinkers who rarely seem to want to haul their empties back to town. The beer of choice for trash-throwing knuckleheads?
Corona seems to be. Bud Light's a real popular one, and then MGD I think comes in third. And you get the people that go through a lot of trouble to hide their litter in the bushes. I find it. But if they're going to litter, just throw it out on the ground so I can get it a lot quicker. They hide it all the time. I'll find 6-packs with the bottles in the 6-pack shoved up under the bush where I know it didn't get thrown there, and they go through more trouble to hide the stuff than just to go ahead and get rid of it. And it happens all the time. If they took half the time in dumping it than they do in hiding it, then there wouldn't be half the trash laying around, because I find most of my stuff in the bushes. They don't realize what happens after it's here. It deteriorates. The animals come down, they'll go after the trash, and then they're susceptible to being in the roadways, getting hit. Yep, it's a tie-off.
Cicotti says he averages up to 30 pounds of trash per hour that he spends on the road. Sometimes he finds piles too big to handle, the cost of rampant growth in the valley and on the mountain.
There's been a lot of construction dumping. A lot of homes that are being worked on in here. The guys don't want to drive to the dump with it, and they'll go back in these. I'll find them back in these woods back here. I'll find old piles of the drywall, insulation, all remnants, construction remnants. I get a lot of that. Yeah. Yep, they just don't care.
The laziest litterers scrape their paper plates off their tailgates onto the ground despite the proximity of garbage containers. But many times there are no containers around. Other times those containers are jammed full because there are so few of them to begin with.
The dumpsters that they do have are just overwhelmed, just really overflowing, I would say.
There's no common courtesy with these folks that come up here. They'll bring fast food. There's not a McDonald's for 25 miles, but I got a ton of McDonald's bags up in the meadow.
In terms of trash receptacles, things like that, are there enough?
There really isn't. There's not enough. Every campground area has one dumpster, but those can be filled in less than a day or two, and they're picked up once a week, every Monday. That's just not enough.
A lack of dumpsters and trash on the roads aren't the problem. They're the symptoms, both of a mountain that is under duress and of a national forest that's been treated like an ugly stepchild. No one can even say with certainty how many people visit the mountain each year. But no matter the exact number, visitor volume far outstrips the meager public facilities, and it shows. More on that in a moment.
It is in trouble. I think it is, and I think the people that live up there realize that.
Just 45 minutes from Las Vegas, Mount Charleston offers winter fun in the snow or hiking through pine forests in the summer.
Almost since the inception of modern Las Vegas, Mount Charleston has been part of the marketing of Southern Nevada, a reason other than gambling to visit.
It's doggone good sledding, too.
The proximity of Mount Charleston to Las Vegas might attract some tourists each year, but the overwhelming majority of those who visit the mountain are locals, both to escape the summer heat and to enjoy the winter snow. How many people trek to the mountains each day or each year? That's the subject of some conjecture.
On a busy weekend, like it's 45,000 people, that's a lot of folks. And when the first snow comes, everybody wants to take their children to the snow, and that's fine. But it was one giant parking lot all the way up.
There's over 1.5 million people that visit here a year. You can't keep up with that. You can't keep up with it.
They've skyrocketed, of course. We're well over 3 million people a year that come up. And that's not counting the ones that go up on the 158 or the 156 that go to the ski lodge.
Surely the U.S. Forest Service, which manages the Toyabe National Forest that encompasses Mount Charleston, must know the annual number of visitors.
The traffic counts have been a little bit conflicting, but I think everybody agrees the place is overwhelmed, and that's putting it mildly, on holiday weekends or after snow events.
As far back as 1988, the estimated visitor count was around 2 million, and since then the valley's growth rate has continued to lead the entire nation, so the true number of Charleston visitors must be higher than 22 years ago. Whatever happens in the valley affects the mountain as directly as if the two were joined by an unseen umbilical cord. The first ranches in the Las Vegas area led to sawmills in the mountains. Charleston timber also supplied mines and the railroad. When automobiles came to the valley, better roads were carved into the mountains. Accessibility meant that cabins could be built in the wilderness, as well as camping and picnic areas. Eventually, commercial properties included dude ranches, a lodge and restaurant, and a ski resort. All of this in a protected national forest. Federal agencies adopted a multi-use philosophy, one that protected the environment but allowed for the use of the resources. Viewers may be familiar with this famous film footage of trees bending under the force of an atomic blast at the Nevada test site.
We've been making studies for years on the thermal characteristics in different forest situations.
Those trees were harvested from the Spring Mountains and were replanted on the test range. In the early 90s, a bill sponsored by Congressman Jim Bilbray declared the region to be the Spring Mountain National Recreation Area, providing further protection from a variety of environmental threats. Federal agencies recognize Charleston as a special place.
We have 70 globally rare species that exist on the mountain, 17 of which occur nowhere else on the earth. And it begs the question, why are they here? Are we doing something to endanger them? Well, that's not the case. It's that we're doing something right. This is the last best refuge for these species.
Of all the threats to the mountain that have emerged over the centuries, natural and man-made, nothing has caused more harm than the relentless growth of the Las Vegas Valley. The sheer number of visitors takes a daily toll on the mountain. They not only trash the place with garbage and with noise, they overload the modest number of public facilities. Parking, for example, is almost non-existent, so people ignore the law. The signs warn that this area is prohibited for parking and snow play, so a family pulls in and does both anyway. This Lee Canyon spot is reserved for emergency helicopters, which means nothing to some drivers. The few hundred people who live on the mountain year-round know all too well how overwhelmed the meager public facilities are by the sheer number of visitors. Few tourists seem to know that most of Kyle Canyon is privately owned. Residents all have their own stories of cars blocking them in or strangers barbecuing in their backyards.
One 4th of July, I came out of my residence and there was a station wagon parked in my driveway. I live up in Rainbow. And it was a man and woman and their family having Kentucky chicken. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, the campgrounds are all full." I said, "We came up, my kids are hungry."
Oh, we've had them knock on their doors to use their restrooms or ask them for that. If they're not home, they'll picnic on their front yard. They'll park anywhere they can. There's no regulations on sound, so you might have a boom box over here doing one thing and a boom box over there doing something else and someone else over here doing a tailgate party. So that certainly isn't conducive to the nature lover who comes up and just wants to enjoy this beautiful haven.
Got water bowl and all of that?
Yep.
Hi, cutie.
Barbara Orcutt owns the Mount Charleston Lodge, which does its best to entice visitors to come up by offering horseback rides, sleigh rides, a bar and restaurant, as well as romantic cabins for rent. But the Orcutt's private investment helps to subsidize the lack of public facilities.
On a busy day, we'll have a 30-minute wait to the ladies' room, which is nothing new, and it's not our customers, but you can't say no, you know.
Orcutt and other residents point to the bathroom issue to demonstrate their point that the mountain has been ignored by the government for too long. When you've got to go up here, there aren't many options. Despite getting almost 2 million visitors a year, there are almost no public restrooms on the mountain. Those that do exist are like this one. They're more like permanent outhouses with no running water. And once you've been inside, you don't want to go back in.
The bathrooms are outhouses, to put it bluntly. They are not flush, water-contained toilets. And they're nothing more than breeding for West Nile virus or heterovirus.
How long have you been asking for bathrooms?
30 years.
Orcutt says she's been writing to federal agencies and to Nevada's congressional delegation for decades, asking for help with Mount Charleston's many needs, including bathrooms. All she has to show for her efforts are a few porta potties.
They finally took up a couple of porta potties, but a lot of people hate porta potties. They go over to the lodge And then guess what? She has to have her septic tank pumped at her expense. And that costs about $300 each time she has that done.
In the grand cosmic scale of things, the absence of a few bathrooms or trash dumpsters or parking spaces may not amount to much, but mountain residents say it's indicative of larger and more serious problems and of ongoing neglect for the mountains by those agencies charged with their protection.
But it just isn't good enough, that it's not working.
So who is responsible? More in a moment.
The traffic is overwhelming because there's no place to park. Where do you park? Where do you go?
The lack of parking on Mount Charleston prompts many motorists to just jam their cars wherever they fit. Warning signs might as well be written in Sanskrit because they're routinely ignored. Not only the no parking signs, but others that advise parts of the forest are off limits. The lack of bathrooms sends people out into the woods. Some walk, others drive.
They're taking firewood. They're going out into the forest where not only are no vehicles allowed, vehicles, ATVs, they're going out into the forest, building their little bonfires because a lot of the camping areas are full, closed once the freezing starts occurring. It's a serious problem.
Serious in many ways. For one thing, the lack of facilities drives people into the most sensitive parts of the forest where protected species live.
In the canyons, where it seems like the most scenic areas are and where people want to be, is also where we have our biological hotspots, concentration of these sensitive plants and animals.
And anyone dumb enough to dump garbage, scrawl graffiti, or ignore laws isn't likely to worry about protected species. For as large as the forest is and as many people who visit it, the Forest Service has only one full-time enforcement officer to cover the entire Mount Charleston area. One. It's yet another indication that the mountain is underserved.
The facilities in the canyon are very limited, and they need improvement and they need expansion. We're talking a couple of bathrooms in the entire canyon. That doesn't facilitate for 40,000 people on a weekend. The campgrounds are overtaxed and overloaded. The parking along the way is overtaxed and overloading. The garbage, it just mounts and it just goes on and on and on.
It's a mess up there. And so right now, on these weekends and snow event days, we don't have the capacity to serve the needs of Las Vegas. There's no question about that.
It's just a simple matter. The infrastructure is totally overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. There's too many cars. There's not enough road. There never has been enough parking.
This is a meeting of the Mount Charleston Visitors Impact Committee, made up of mountain residents and representatives from several agencies that serve the area, including Metro Police, the Forest Service, and fire officials. Committee members have been trying for a long time to figure out how to cope with the many challenges facing the mountain, and they often trade horror stories.
If you go up to the meadow on a snowy weekend around the Christmas holiday, everybody is parking the road. Mm-hmm. So there's not enough tow trucks to move them all. And plus it's 45 minutes away from getting service.
Committee members know that several government studies are underway into the effects of growth on the mountain. Land use studies, transportation studies, wildlife studies. They've seen studies before, including this one by the Clark County Department of Comprehensive Planning. It noted that the demand for outdoor recreation in this national forest already exceeds capacity on busy weekends, and that more population growth is expected to stretch available resources even further. The study was written in 1980.
And the demand alone exceeds peak weekend capacity, and this is in 1980.
And not much has improved in the interim years, even though visitor volume has exploded. The most vocal critics allege that government agencies are so fond of studies because studies are easier than taking action. It's simply less work to study the lack of public resources on the mountain than it is to build and maintain new campgrounds or bathrooms or trails.
I don't know how much they have spent in studies, and they do studies well and long and expensive, and they're scoping, I believe they call it, has gone there, but the actual the actual physical, say, look at this, I've just put in a new parking lot, or I've put in a water fountain, for heaven's sakes. We're talking about very small improvements that aren't even being done.
Lots of studies.
Yeah.
Not much improvement.
Right.
Few challenges are more troubling or more obvious than the health of the forest itself. A recent tree survey by the state confirms what residents already knew. Something is killing the trees.
One disease seems to bring another disease of the trees. The beetle barks, the tops of those trees right there, that's a new kind of disease. I'm not sure what they call it. Where the trees themselves die from the top down. Others die just through the bark itself.
The trees on Barbara Orcutt's lodge property are dying. So are the ones that ring her land. Anyone who drives up the mountain can see the standing carcasses along the road. The brown husks of others dot the forest in every direction. Years of drought have weakened the forest, making the trees more susceptible to insects and diseases, and it shows.
In general, are you saying that the forest is less healthy than it's been?
Yes, sure. Drought, the last 10 years, or however many years of drought, that's played a key role. Just that stress, that added stress, more stems per acre, more trees, drought. The bugs kind of move in.
Dead, brittle trees are ideal fuel for fires, so residents wonder why there's been no program to remove them. Nor has there been any ongoing effort to thin undergrowth and brush that would be even more fuel for a potential blaze. Charleston residents meet regularly with assorted agencies to express these concerns. In light of how careless visitors are, they worry that it's only a matter of time.
It takes one barbecue dumped on the ground and a little breeze, and welcome back to San Diego.
Yeah.
And it's not just an annoyance. It's actually horrifically dangerous up here.
These people that go back in the forest, build a bonfire. We walked out our door a couple of summers ago and somebody had dumped red hot charcoal briquettes out of their barbecue onto the forest floor. And it's like you said, it's total disregard. I don't understand, because this is it. This thing goes up, there is no more.
We know there has not been any forestry done in many, many decades. To take out the old trees. We would be in a terrible state with a fire up here.
And the fire is raging out of control tonight.
There have been bad fires on the mountain in past years, even this year. But is the big one still lurking? Coming up, what are the chances that a catastrophic fire could sweep through Kyle Canyon, wiping out everything and everyone? The turning of the leaves among Mount Charleston's aspens is a sign not only of autumn approaching, but a sign that Kyle Canyon has likely survived another fire season. The danger level remains high, but the worst months are behind us. Also behind us is a close call.
The wildfire is burning above State Route 158.
14 to 15 homes in the Deer Creek subdivision have been evacuated.
Totally panicked.
In July 2004, a smoky fire in the Robbers Roost area on the outskirts of Kyle Canyon sent a jolt through Mount Charleston residents. The mountain was sealed off. People were advised to evacuate. Firefighters worried the winds might send the flames right up the canyon. It didn't happen, and it turned out estimates of acreage burned were greatly exaggerated. But it proved to be a wake-up call, a somber reminder that the big one everyone's been expecting could happen at any time.
Bottom line, this community is just waiting for a catastrophic fire. And the more visitors we have on this mountain that don't care about this mountain, the odds are, sooner or later, something is going to happen.
The worst-case scenario is a fire that begins at the bottom of Kyle Canyon, then marches inexorably toward the cabins and homes of an estimated 2,000 residents. This is a box canyon with only a single two-lane road in or out. And since water pressure on the mountain is extremely low, you don't have to be a firefighter to connect the dots to a potential disaster.
It could very, very easily happen. This is an older subdivision. There's one way in and out through this canyon. So, getting people out and emergency vehicles in becomes an extremely
high hurdle to cross.
Certainly the potential for a large fire within the Kyle Canyon is a distinct possibility.
The view from up here is simply breathtaking. In the past 24 hours, the fire has moved northeast about 6 or 7 miles down the mountain, consuming everything in sight.
Longtime residents might remember a ravenous fire in 1981 that torched hundreds of acres on the mountain.
The fire line about 5 to 6 miles right now, burning completely out of control.
But it was a different scene on this side of the mountain as the blaze gobbled up dozens of acres.
Despite this fire and others over the years, there's been no master evacuation plan for Kyle Canyon in effect until just recently, and much of that plan is still in flux. The Robbers Roost fire drove home the point to responding agencies that they still have a long way to go in planning how to get people out and get emergency vehicles in when the big one hits. As with many of the other issues facing the mountain, this one is being studied. Some residents aren't happy about it.
Let me put it this way, time is of the essence. And summits and meetings and disagreements amongst agencies, studies. This is not going to help our fire season for next year. I mean, they won't even be getting into good, solid committee meetings until then. And we'll be right back where we were this summer again. It's not that they have to study a whole lot. I mean, this is not a brain surgeon type thing.
Other residents aren't as harsh with the U.S. Forest Service. They blame the absence of plans and facilities on budget constraints.
The Forest Service needs help, you know, in doing some of the things that they need to have done because, as I said, they don't have the kind of staff for the number of people that we have going in.
It's not that they don't care. They do care. They give everything they got. They pull people off duty to work overtime up here on the mountain when we have these situations. But bottom line is there just isn't enough funding out there for all of the agencies involved.
The Forest Service and most other agencies with a piece of the mountain attend most resident meetings, including a recent one to discuss fire evacuation plans. The government was there, but only 8 residents showed up. Budget constraints or not, the Forest Service seems to have been energized by the Robbers Roost fire. After years of complaints about dead trees and thick brush in the forest, the agency is now implementing a plan to cut a barrier around all of the occupied parts of Kyle Canyon.
Before you used to duck and crawl through this spaces, and now as you can see, you can walk freely.
The creation of a so-called fuel break around Charleston subdivisions is accomplished by trimming some trees, cutting down others, and removing brush. Some of the wood is sawed and stacked for fireplaces up here. Much will be made available to the general public for firewood or as biomass for landscaping.
It improves the health of the forest, reduces the fuel loading for fires, and it creates a better environment.
And when the catastrophic fire hits, if it hits, the fuel break being carved around Charleston homes will be the equivalent of the Maginot Line.
It's going to be a challenging day, we know that, but this fuel break really is it's the backbone to anything we got to do. You know, we've got to start with this fuel break. You know, we can fight fire in here. You know, once we burn this stuff this fall and remove it, this gives us a chance to fight fire.
A lot of the work is being done by inmates from the Indian Springs Conservation Camp, coordinated by the State Division of Forestry. This team removes potential fire fuel from private property, hauls the stuff downhill one pile at a time, then feeds it all into a giant chipper machine. The wood chips may end up in gardens or as a biomass fuel to heat rural Nevada schoolrooms. The fire danger is reduced and the property looks better. And even though state grants mean property owners pay almost nothing to get this done, many owners up here have resisted for purely aesthetic reasons.
A lot of the residents are resistant at first to the idea of cutting down trees and brush, because that's why I moved up here, that's why I bought this property. But as more of them see the work that's being done, they see that we're not clear cutting, we're not cutting down all the vegetation, we're just taking out the accumulated overgrowth, particularly the brush, mostly the brush that we're thinning out. Some of the smaller trees, we're leaving the large trees, and it still looks like a forest when we're done, but it's a lot safer.
But can one or two inmate crews ever truly prepare for the big fire? And what about all those other problems facing the mountain? Who's taking care of them? More on that in a moment.
They already have the answers. This is not a hard question.
They think I'm obsessed with litter, but I'm obsessed with seeing it not here.
Each week for 4.5 years, Brian Cicotti used his only day off to pick up garbage along the roads on Mount Charleston. He picks up beer bottles, hypodermic syringes, and dirty diapers, and sometimes gets in the face of litterers caught in the act.
I literally had a guy throw a bag right in front of me last New Year's Day. I picked it up and I put it right back into his truck, right into the window, exactly like that.
What do you say to him?
I tell him, you want to litter up here? Don't come up here. See, we have to live up here and see it. All the residents up here day to day, and we see it. I saw it every day going back and forth to work.
Cicotti is still picking up other people's garbage, but now instead of 1 day a week, he does it full time. He fought for and obtained a special grant from the U.S. Forest Service. It's a 3-year pilot program.
Never been done before in the U.S. Forestry. It's totally a new program that they've come up with, and if it works, they're going to put it into other federal lands across the country.
Considering how slow government moves in matters regarding Mount Charleston, this trash pickup program counts as real progress. But there's more. The Forest Service recently informed Charleston residents that it has the green light to hire 4 full-time enforcement officers for the mountain to supplement the single officer working there now. The additional enforcement will target people who litter, illegally park, are careless with fire, or otherwise get out of line. And the Forest Service has more help on the way.
We're also able to get more dumpsters, pay for more trash pickups, and hopefully have more of a holistic anti-littering campaign. What we look for when we look at anti-littering campaigns is behavior modifications, where people used to come up and just throw their litter on the ground. We can change their behavior so that they no longer throw their litter, they pack it out.
The Forest Service has recently launched a comprehensive assessment of the mountain to figure out how to balance its resources with the various demands placed on it by visitors, residents, and the environment itself. How much can it handle? But since this is a 2-year study, residents haven't been expecting any new initiatives for many months to come. The roar of this wood chipper is the sound of hope for Charleston property owners. The Nevada Division of Forestry, working with its federal counterpart, has started bringing in prison work crews to at long last chop a fire protection line around Charleston subdivisions, regarded as sitting ducks for a big fire. The state is also offering grants to property owners to pay the cost of removing thick brush that might also fuel a fire. Some of the owners, worried that the removal of brush might mean they'd be able to see their neighbors' cabins, have balked at the offer, even if it might save their homes in a deadly fire.
It needs to be a coordinated effort. You know, we're doing fuel reduction work on individual properties, and it looks great on that individual property, but next door there's somebody that hasn't done the fuel reduction work. And if there was a forest fire that approached and threatened the community, that house would burn, and that house in burning would threaten the house next to it.
Efforts to cut a fire line around Kyle Canyon neighborhoods began on this 5-acre private parcel. The inmate crews did a solid job of thinning out the forest, which will help thwart future fires while improving the health of the remaining trees. But it took months to get it done. Generally, only 1 inmate crew per day is assigned to work up here, and considering the sheer magnitude of this forest and the amount of work that needs to be done, including weeding out dead or dying trees, the foresters will never get caught up.
No, it's taking little bites out of the elephant, that's for sure. There's a lot of work to do, and the magnitude, not only here in Mount Charleston, but across the state, is truly phenomenal.
State Forestry boss Pete Anderson thinks the only way the work will ever get done is if the private sector gets interested. If markets existed for wood chips or for wood from the trees that are thinned out, then private companies might hire their own crews to do the work instead of the government.
And is anybody working on something like that?
We are working on that across the West, a variety of different areas. Fuels for Schools is one, where we're using cogeneration to heat elementary schools. We have a project in Ely that just broke ground. But again, it's little bites of the elephant, and we have to step up the amount of these types of projects.
The flurry of new activity by agencies long charged with taking care of Charleston is encouraging to residents, but they aren't completely sold. For too long, they say, these same agencies have seemingly dragged their feet when it came to protecting the mountain's resources and residents. A major reason for that is lack of money for new initiatives, but now hundreds of millions of dollars are flowing into government coffers because of the sale of public lands in southern Nevada. Most of the money is supposed to stay here, but Charleston residents were appalled to learn that $30 million a year from land deals here is being sent north to help preserve Lake Tahoe. A worthy cause, they admit, but why not save Mount Charleston too?
Then, of course, there's the $300 million that went into the clarity of Lake Tahoe. I hate to be critical of the senator, but the clarity of Lake Mead is in desperate need, and definitely the protection of our sensitive environment up here could use $300 million too.
We need more from the federal government. We need to not just focus on Tahoe, which needs to be protected, but we have a cherished property here that needs to be watched out, both Red Rock and Mount Charleston.
Nevada Senator Reid helped arrange the extra funds for Lake Tahoe. He says he's not opposed to getting some help for Charleston, but that the mountain's supporters haven't done much to present a united front the way Tahoe has done.
The people of Mount Charleston should get their act together and decide what they want and tell us. The one reason that Lake Tahoe has done so well is the community is together. They know what they want, and they come to us verse and line. They know what they want, and they tell us. And I think we need that.
Already, some funds from public land sales have been put into the pipeline to help Mount Charleston. This 128-acre property that once housed a golf course at the bottom of Kyle Canyon was recently purchased by the Forest Service. It has the potential to be the cornerstone of a whole new era for the Spring Mountains. No decision has been made about exactly how the land will be used, but a lot of intriguing ideas are being considered.
Things that have been suggested to us by the public and by Forest Service employees are putting in a shuttle service where people can park their cars and then shuttle up to other destinations. For instance, shuttle up to the ski area. I think there's a great opportunity there for a partnership with the ski area. We could put in visitor centers, camping areas, RV parking.
The toughest part of the road ahead for the Forest Service, often perceived by residents as aloof and uninterested, might be to convince people that the agency is truly jazzed about the possibilities that might be just around the corner.
The employees of Spring Mountain, they're engaged. They're busy. They love this mountain just like the people who live here do, just like the people that visit it, and we're real fortunate to work here.
In order to save Lake Tahoe, elected officials staged a Tahoe Summit. Does Mount Charleston deserve any less? A look down the road ahead when we return.
The pictures show both the stalagmites and the stalactites, some beautiful columns. They also, an old article we dug up from the Nevadan and showed that a pool of really clear water was in there. There's one small cave here.
Mount Charleston Lodge owner Barbara Orcutt thought she had a great idea for developing a new attraction for the mountain. She found some old records about an underground cavern that had been discovered by road crews in 1961. The so-called Soda Straw Cave caused a brief stir in Las Vegas back then, was visited, explored, and mapped out, but was then cemented shut in 1962, and no one's been inside since. The Forest Service took the action because vandals were destroying the cave. They had to close it to save it.
We were told never to go near the cave or we would be arrested.
Orcutt, who's been a frequent critic of federal agencies, accused the Forest Service of keeping the cave closed because the agency simply didn't want any new responsibilities on the mountain. She's continued to make noise about the cave and about the Forest Service. Now, the Forest Service is coming after her.
He was our acting district ranger, Rod Stewart. And he wanted to inform me that I should not prepare to have a sleigh ride permit for this year since there was federal criminal charges made against me.
Orcutt's Lodge has offered holiday sleigh rides for 18 years and has never had a serious accident. The lodge also operates horseback trail rides, also with an excellent safety record. But back in May, an employee associated with the lodge led 2 riders onto an unapproved trail. They got lost, and one rider broke her wrist. Now the government has suspended both the sleigh rides and the horseback riding, pending a criminal probe. Orcutt thinks it's because of her previous criticism of the Forest Service.
I asked him if it was over the cave, and he said, no, I don't think so. I said, well, I just don't understand. I've never heard that I was under investigation for federal criminal charges. That's a pretty big scene, you know. It needless to say, scared me quite a bit.
Orcutt's ongoing battle with federal agencies is an example of the fragile balance that exists on the mountain, a fragile political balance, that is. Just as cooler temperatures have changed the color of the leaves up here, a new wind is blowing in from Washington and Carson City, one that hints of better days ahead for the troubled mountain. It wasn't that long ago that Lake Tahoe was considered to be in danger, in large part because too many people with too many boats were using it. Nevada's senators helped organize a Tahoe summit that set priorities, and they obtained millions of public dollars to help the lake, which today is already much improved. Since Eyewitness News interviewed Senator Harry Reid months ago concerning the state of Mount Charleston, Reid has reportedly been working behind the scenes to see if there's much of an appetite for a Charleston summit. No one is speaking about a summit on the record, but we've learned that several agencies, environmental groups, and others have been contacted. Those who know the mountain best say it makes sense to put everything on the table.
If there's a summit, we need to make sure that we know all the budgets that are available and what we have not been asking for, and then what the needs are so that we're properly funding them. So if the state needs to be a partner, fine, but tell us what that is. If local government has revenue, let's find out what that is.
It's a partnership between ourselves, state and federal, and the private landowners. And we have to be in this together. It's a cooperative approach.
A Charleston summit, if one is held, could tackle some obvious concerns. One priority must be the health of the forest itself. What can be done to stop the trees from dying and to clear out those that are already dead so they don't become fuel for a catastrophic fire? The kind of fires that have struck in other parts of the Spring Mountains could result in hundreds of deaths if a similar one raced through Kyle Canyon, the most populated part of the mountain. Firefighters have done such a good job in the past of suppressing small fires that the forests have grown thick with brush and small trees. That's bad for the health of the bigger trees, and it makes the fire danger worse. The Forest Service says it has plans to remove some of the dead trees from Charleston's roads.
Last week of this month, Department of Transportation and the Forest Service are going to remove a lot of the dead standing trees along 157.
For the aesthetics of it?
And I hate to see one of them big trees fall on a car.
But there are many more dead and dying trees out in the forest, away from the roads, and someone needs to address how to deal with them as well. It wouldn't hurt to have ongoing fire education, both for residents on the mountain and in the valley. In the event of a killer fire, many residents simply don't know what they're supposed to do, and they could use a lesson or two in what they should do to lessen fire dangers. Valley residents who choose to visit the mountain but behave recklessly probably need to start from scratch.
Most of the problems that we have with fires are from visitors. We get occasional campfires where there shouldn't be campfires that are left burning when the people leave, a lot of trash and debris left behind in places. So yes, there's some evidence that the visitors that come up from Las Vegas and other places don't appreciate the mountain.
A summit might also address yet another threat to the mountain. At the bottom of Kyle Canyon, a new community is forming on land that has been annexed into the city of Las Vegas. Thousands of new residents will eventually move in, and they will put new pressures on the mountain's already thinly stretched resources.
Yes, the city of Las Vegas is expanding and will continue to expand, but it's not expanding up Kyle Canyon. It's expanding up to the mouth.
Well, we certainly don't want it to end up like Red Rock, arguing over whether there's going to be a major casino at the bottom of the mountain. The city is annexing that over there, to my understanding. I'm not sure if they have done everything there yet. But the mountain is fragile. I mean, this is the only forest there is.
Roadside trash guy Brian Cicotti's one-man litter effort is admirable, but he will never get the job done alone. Cicotti is looking for community groups to volunteer their time to pitch in and help, and he hopes to get a message out to the jerks who litter.
If you come up here and you throw the trash, you're going to be cited. The forestry does have people out on patrol for that. Now they've got it's up to $5,000 in the National Forest as far as a fine. But if you're going to come up, take it back with you. That's all we ask.
One other potential topic, an entrance fee to the mountain. The newly acquired golf course property could serve as a formal entry point for the mountain. Visitors would pay a small fee, and that money would go back into providing for the mountain. An entrance point might also deter some of the rowdier crowd.
We're going to have to start, charging to get in, so that we'll have somebody there that will tell people what they can do. I think having the entrance, having a visitor center so that they'll have a place to at least see what they can't do, where they can go.
Imposing a fee would likely require congressional action. The Forest Service says it's wary of charging much because it doesn't want to exclude anyone from visiting. It's at least worth talking about, though.
Everything should be explored, put everything on the table, and find out what works the best. And if it comes down to that, if there can be a way to prove that that would be a benefit, not just another revenue source for the federal government, that we would never get anything back.
So what will become of the Spring Mountain Recreational Area and to Mount Charleston? No one can give a complete answer right now, but there is a clear list of things that needs to be done. First, there should be a Mount Charleston Summit, one that should bring all the parties to the table and which lays out how much money might be available and from what sources. Second, that a list of priorities should be established for the long term and the short term. The long-term efforts will require careful planning, such as what to do with the old golf course property. But the short-term needs, like more dumpsters and a few bathrooms, for gosh sakes, don't require an investigation by a blue ribbon commission. Just go out and get some. Third, the residents of Mount Charleston need to get their act together. They need to get involved in charting their own future. They need to cooperate with government agencies when those agencies are trying to help them, and they need to speak with one voice when talking to Washington about what they want and need. And finally, fourth, we need to deal with the complete idiots who travel to the mountain and trash the place, tossing out their beer bottles and dirty diapers. This kind of behavior is simply unacceptable. We heard some officials say, well, maybe we need to educate people and it's not their fault since they've always lived in urban areas and don't know the forest. Fine, educate them. But it's hard to believe anyone could be so stupid that they don't know it's wrong to dump trash in a national forest. They don't throw soiled diapers out on their front lawns at home, do they? Even if they live in urban areas? Their problem isn't that they don't know, it's that they don't care. They need to be dealt with. Mount Charleston is a special place, a place for reflection and an appreciation of nature. The many agencies involved in managing the mountain can help to implement programs and to preserve its beauty, but it's up to all the rest of us to make sure it gets done and done right. I'm George Knapp. Good night.